The Bengals have to improve their defense significantly this offseason. Part of that is bringing in Al Golden to coordinate the defense. Let's talk about what changes we can expect from Golden's defense in the trenches.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow, along with your host, James Rapien. Today we are joined by Mike Santagata, who wrote up the detailed changes and schematics that you can expect from Al Golden's defense over at BengalsTalk.com. We're, as always, on the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. So if you're new to the show, you've maybe missed us talking about the T. Higgins franchise tag, the news that James Rapien had a couple of days ago. Maybe you missed us talking about potential alternatives if they can't figure it out with Trey Hendrickson yesterday, as we're diving into some defensive scheme. At least that's the plan for the next couple of days, depending on if we get interrupted by breaking news or not. Like Ryan Rico signing a couple of days ago, we had not had the opportunity to talk about that one. So congrats to Ryan Rico, an exclusive rights free agent, for getting a 2-year deal. It's very similar to what the Bengals did with Jake Browning a year ago. And today is going to be first of a two-parter. We're going to focus on the front today. And Mike, you broke this into two separate pieces when you wrote about it for Bengals Talk. And it seems like we're going to see a pretty significant change in the way we see personnel from Al Golden's defense on base downs, at least, where he's talking about being a base 4-3 defense, 3 linebackers on the field, where with Lou Anarumo, we saw 5-man defensive services consistently. What does that mean from your perspective? Is that the expectation, and what's the big difference in having an extra linebacker on the field versus the extra defensive lineman?
So it's different because instead of having an odd front 5-man surface, which Al did use at times at Notre Dame, he talked about being multiple, and you sometimes need to. It's more often when an offense gets heavy, they're going to match that with 4-3 personnel, whereas Lou Anarumo was kind of the opposite. He'd go out there in a 4-3 sometimes. Think of the Ravens games. Think of some games against mobile linebackers because you have those free-flowing second-level defenders. But more often than not, at least when he had the pieces for it, he tried to be in an odd front 5-man surface. And this is only in like 20% of snaps. It's not the end of the world. Like they will be a nickel most of the time, and it will probably look pretty similar because Lou ran a 4-2-5 nickel, and Al's probably going to run a 4-2-5 nickel for the most part. But on these base downs, this is different. And main difference is you don't have a nose tackle head up over the center. He's going to be either in a shade or one technique on the outside shoulder, either shoulder of the center, and then all the way out to a 2-eye, which would be just inside the guard on his inside shoulder, both in this A-gap area, but that'll be one of the main differences. You have him there. You're still going to have a 3 technique on the outside shoulder of the guard on the opposite side, and then 2 ends that can be anywhere from 5 all the way out to wide 9s if they need them. And then obviously the other difference, what you mentioned, was having the extra linebacker. Instead of having 2 linebackers, Pratt and Wilson, with 5 men in front of them, you have 4 guys in front of them, and you're going to have 3 linebackers back there. The only thing that I think will be a little bit similar is Al likes to slow play his front when he's not slanting or blitzing or anything like that. He doesn't ask them to fire off the ball and get upfield, similar to like a D'Amico Ryans or Robert Saleh or a lot of guys that run these 4-down base fronts. They want them firing off the ball, stop the run on your way to go hit the quarterback. Al wants them to play the run first, play slow, and deconstruct the blocks before any type of pass rush situation. You can go your hands before your feet, where the other one's your feet, or fire your feet, and then you can use your hands. Just down up versus up down for fast versus slow. Hope that makes sense. But yeah, basically, you got the 4-man front. The nose is no longer head up over the center. You could even not call him a nose. I still do because it's usually your biggest defensive tackle, but a lot of these places will just interchange those guys. One's left, one's right, and they're just going to change based off the strength of the offense. But it's different, but it's a little bit similar too, just because of the way they slow play things.
as far as their current defensive line, and it's going to look different. We don't know about BJ Hill, but this is mostly a McKinley Jackson and Chris Jenkins Jr. question. How do you think they fit in this? How do you think that it impacts them?
I think Chris will be all right. I mean, he's probably going to play a lot of 3 technique. Maybe they'll put him at nose, but he hasn't been the best at stopping double teams. So probably want that away from being in the double team gap, being in the middle there. He's been really good against the run otherwise, though. Like when he faces reach blocks, base blocks, back blocks, he does a pretty good job against those. Just double teams, very inconsistent. And McKinley Jackson's, he's not the best run defender at the moment either. Like there's flashes, but McKinley Jackson's best play is when he gets to fire off the ball. So it almost feels like it's not a schematic fit based off of like they just keep asking him to slow play these things. That's just not what he's best at right now. He's best at firing off the ball. I think there's some stuff Al does that will fit him better. He's got the size to play nose, but all of his traits are 3 technique traits where if I want a guy that's firing off the ball, getting penetration and using his get off and being an explosive athlete, I think of more of a 3 technique than I do a nose tackle. I think the nose tackle, that's useful, but the best thing that guy can do is eat space. And McKinley doesn't really do that. And Chris doesn't really eat double teams like that. So in my head, they're both kind of fit the 3 technique mold of this defense. But I think just based on size, you'll probably see McKinley at that shade or at the G2I spot. And you might see Chris there if he's better against double teams this season, because it's not as much of a size requirement to play nose tackle in a 4 down front as it is in a 3-4-5-2 type of defense.
Got to see if Chris Jenkins Jr. can put on some weight and play a little bit more at Chris Jenkins Sr.'s weight. And then you can put him anywhere, really, because Chris Jenkins Sr. could also move at like 350 pounds or whatever he played at. But let's talk a little bit about this Viper position and how that fits in to the front of things, which is really a fancy name for the other defensive end, but he's from a 2-point stance. We'll get into that topic and how this relates to what we should expect from personnel changes, because the Bengals are going to be making a lot of personnel changes. We're talking about Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson, but there will be changes in that department. We'll get to those topics as we continue the show coming up next.
This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives you and your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. And that expert is going to find you every deduction possible, file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with Intuit. TurboTax full live service, real-time updates, only an iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees.
Let's hit this Viper position. That
Viper. Dodge Viper? The snake?
A fancy name.
Yeah.
I don't know if I understand the name. Maybe you can tell us about the etymology if you know about it, Mike. Where did that name come from? But it's this position in the Al Golden defense that had a lot of people pretty excited or at least discussing when the hire was made. But as you've pointed out, Mike, it's essentially just a 2-point stance defensive end. Can you talk a little bit more about what to expect there if we see that come over to the Al Golden NFL defense?
Yeah, I think for the entomology, my best guess is when Al goes to high school kids' homes, it's a lot cooler to go, you're not an edge, you're a Viper. You're not defensive end. You get to play this cool spot. It's called the Viper. Because for 90 to 95% of downs, this guy just plays defensive end. It's not that he's doing anything crazy. And but because he's in a 2-point stance, he's usually the easier person to ask to drop into coverage if they're going to run a creeper or a fire zone or something that's going to ask somebody, one of the defensive linemen, to drop back. Just by nature of he's not as far down. Sometimes they move. That's typically like a 3rd down thing that they're just going to get that guy an advantage. And really, most defenses do that. It's some people think it's similar to like a Frankie Louvu, but then you look at the depth chart that they listed Viper, and the starting Viper was bigger than the starting defensive end. And the whole way down, it's all about the same, about 240 to 265 pound players. Neither one of them, until you get down to the very bottom, the 6th string Vipers were like 200 to 205 pounds, and they were like freshmen. So I think they're just waiting to put on weight. But maybe that gives you the sliver of hope that you're thinking this is going to be a linebacker defensive end hybrid. I don't buy it, just because that's not what happened at the end that level. And I believe he's even said at the NFL level, like, yeah, we used Trey as a Viper sometimes or something like that. It's just like they had a guy that played that position for the most part, and he was not somebody that was you would confuse between a linebacker and defensive end. Overall, 90 to 95% the same. They are more likely to drop into coverage and do a little bit of that. Sometimes I feel like the Viper like to line up with the running back because Al runs these peel pressures. And what that means is your last guy on the line, in this case, the Viper, would run with the running back if he went fast out that way, runs a wheel route, runs a flat route. It's all out pressure for the most part. Al almost always kept a safety deep, but it's one of his highest pressures. 6 guys probably coming at him. But if that running back leaks out, there's not a man attached to him. It's just whichever side he goes, and most likely will be the side he's on, that defensive end just runs with him because the pressure should get home before that guy gets toasted or something. That would be the other, I guess, slight difference. But I also wonder about that at the NFL level and with the Bengals, because Trey just loves lining up, or either Trey or Lou love lining him up over the left tackle. And that feels like a Trey thing to me, although he was really good when he rushed over the right side. He was just a really good player. So I don't know. It could be either one. Maybe that changes, but I don't see it as some revolutionary thing. Cool name, though. Cool name. With the Y, very 90s to me.
Very 90s. Yeah. Will that impact Trey, his responsibility, assuming Trey's back and lining up at defensive end? I mean, how do you think it plays? Obviously, they can have new guys there, but I think a lot of what we're talking about here is Trey Hendrickson, Myles Murphy, especially. How could it impact Trey? Let's start there, because I think that's the biggest thing is if his role could change at all.
So if you think that the Viper is 100% coming in the same iteration, to me, I would want that to be Murphy, because I want Trey rushing every down. I don't want him dropping back into coverage, even if it's on 5% of snaps, which he was already kind of doing with Lou Anarumo. And so was Murphy, dropped them both probably about 5% of snaps or so. So I don't think his role really changes too much. I think minor changes could be if the Viper does line up with the running back, then maybe he switches sides a little bit more, whether or not he is the Viper. And if he is the Viper, he might drop into coverage 1-2% more than he did in the previous year. But honestly, make that Murphy. I remember him clamping David Njoku at the goal line. Maybe he is the linebacker hybrid they've been wanting.
And you could just have the Viper play sides if you need to. Yeah. If Trey wants to stay on the side of the defense he wants to stay on, and that's where the running back is, you're in a 2-point stance. And if the running back is away from you, well, now you can put your hand in the ground if you want. But Trey, I feel, is putting his hand in the ground or playing a 2-point stance based on what he wants to do quite often too, more than perhaps what the play is calling for. But if he is dropping, then, you might see things a little bit differently. But what I'm hearing is that with the way the Bengals drop their defensive linemen from time to time anyway, not a huge difference there. But I wonder, Mike, if you can take anything away from the kinds of players Al Golden featured on the Notre Dame defensive front, and Marcus Freeman as well, because Freeman had an impact, of course, on what we saw from that Golden defense as well, from that literally Golden defense and Notre Dame with the helmets as well. Do you expect a change in preferences for body types at all on the defensive front? Because we're talking about the potential for adding edge rushing help. We're talking about the need to add one or two at least pieces on the interior, probably 3. Should we expect more of the same? Do we think there are philosophical differences in the type of player there? This is maybe a Nolan Smith question a little bit. And in this draft, a Mike Green, James Pierce question a little bit. What are your thoughts there?
So I think in general, when you look at Mike Green and Nolan Smith and James Pierce, I talked about 240 to 265. They are on the lower end of that. I mean, but it fits. But that's also college. If I had to guess, he probably still has a preference to have bigger defensive ends. Most of these four down fronts like to have big defensive ends. They don't prefer to have smaller guys. That's why that general idea of a 3-4 outside linebacker being a small pass rusher versus a big 4-3 defensive end exists. I don't think it's impossible that he goes for one of those guys because, well, Nolan Smith went to a 4-down front. Will Anderson was actually, I think, only like 255 or so pounds. He went to a 4-down front. He's been awesome. So I think there's a chance that, he could be fine with a smaller defensive end, but I think if you asked him, the preference would still be there. It's not like you completely cross the guys off, but you see a guy's 235, 240 pounds. You kind of go, I like my defensive ends to be 260, 265 pounds rather than on the lower end. And really that lower end that the Bengals, or the higher end that the Bengals have preferred, has really been there forever. I mean, since 2000, since Duke Tobin, Marvin Lewis, they preferred the same thing. So it almost feels like a GM thing more than it feels like the defensive coordinators have all preferred this exact player.
Yeah, even when they went to 5-man surfaces and you had the opportunity to potentially go lighter at the edges because you have more weight, more heavy bodies in between them, that we saw the Bengals stick with that model. James, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're right. I think it's very much, and they look at receivers this way too. Like they want a certain style for the North, especially, and I think that's a factor as well. I know Zach mentioned, and obviously on that day he clearly had Al Golden in mind, but the day they fired Lou, he's like, yeah, we want someone that understands the North, and so I just think that's they look through that lens, whether it's fair or not, or smart or not, and if you're talking about a 240-pound defensive end that's super quick and can rush the passer, it's like, all right, well, can he tackle Derrick Henry? And that's what they'll bring up, whether that's smart or not.
Can he hang with Lamar Jackson and Lamar Jackson's shake? There's two sides for that in the AFC North these days.
Oh, and not just Lamar Jackson. Can he deal with insert whoever is going to be running the ball? Because it's just going to be a physical division, So, but there's also athletes all over. To your point, and Lamar is the biggest alien of them all.
Got to talk a little bit about Al Golden's blitzes as well here as we finish up the show. I want to talk about what we can expect from the Bengals linebacker room. Talking about personnel changes and expecting, well, Jermaine Pratt's requested a trade. We need to figure out 3 linebacker set again, and whether that features Akeem Davis-Gaither or not, something we're going to see a little bit more of. And we can talk about what we can expect Al Golden to be looking for the 2025 and beyond linebacker room. We'll get to that topic to finish the show coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Maybe you're bullish on the Bengals and their 2025 chances. You can get in on all of the NFL future bets with FanDuel. And it's not just NFL, of course. The NBA action set to resume following the All-Star break, and NBA just getting started with the playoffs right around the corner. Is the perfect time to get in on all of the fun with FanDuel. Opening day just over a month away, like 6 weeks away, and that means, well, you can get in on Cincinnati Reds futures as well. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, and if you missed the opening tip in the NBA, that's fine. You can live bet it. You can have same-game parlays throughout the game. Any bet, any wager that you could think of making, well, FanDuel is going to have it. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
Let's talk linebackers here, as the Bengals probably need 2 new linebackers, and one of them still has a diminished role. And in my mind, that's probably the prototypical Sam linebacker, strong side linebacker who's playing more on base downs, probably coming off the field on passing downs. So thumper role that we haven't seen in Cincinnati really for quite a while. You've got converted safeties playing linebacker for the Bengals in recent years. What are your thoughts there, Mike, as we look at Logan Wilson is going to be the centerpiece, but they're going to add 2 more linebackers to that group. What do you think we should expect in terms of personnel, assuming that Jermaine Pratt's trade request is either honored or he's released, as seems to be what the tea leaves are indicating right now?
Yeah, I think the main difference I have in my mind for what he preferred at Notre Dame was the blitzing, where he blitzed a lot, and all these blitzes are different. We're going to talk about it. They're not all just send everyone and light the house on fire like he kind of did on that last play against Ohio State. But there's 5-man pressures, 6-man pressures while keeping a safety back, or sometimes even having an underneath defender too, and just getting creative with it. I thought all of his linebackers could blitz and could all pass rush when they blitzed, and they could all go lay a hit on a fullback. And I don't think there's a preference for size when I look at them, where Jack Kaiser is 231 pounds, and he was one of their main linebackers, 239 pounds for number 34. Number 4 was 216 pounds. He played a lot. It's like you look at these guys, and they're not huge. So it's not that they want the hulking Takeo Spikes, 3 of those back there.
I mean, we would take that, though, right?
I would.
Takeo's pretty good.
Takeo was awesome.
Pretty good.
Maybe I should use somebody else, but he was awesome. But
Ray
Maluga.
Yeah,
that's probably a better fit, but he's not the first mind. He's not the first player come to mind when I'm thinking of big linebackers. I think it's Takeo. So
that's true. You're thinking big. I was just thinking of random when I said Vigil. To be
Vigil, Vinny Ray. But 3.
Don't call Lamar Jackson when Nick Vigil's in town. Oh boy. All right.
So it's not that they want like 250-pound monsters back there the same way that they did in the old days. I think the main difference here is he probably likes Wilson and probably wouldn't have even really minded Pratt. But I think the main difference you look for is you still want a guy that's intelligent, the guy that can cover, a guy that can be athletic. But blitzing, if he's going to bring that, all these non-traditional blitzes, sending non-traditional rushers, then I would expect that he wants guys that can pass rush a little bit at the linebacker spot. Maybe that is your Frankie Louvu idea, where some people thought that was Viper. Maybe they just want that on the linebacker group, where this guy can go cover, play linebacker, jump over and hit Jalen Hurts 3 times on offsides, do whatever that they want them to do, but also blitz. He can blitz and wreak havoc that way. That would be, I think, the one difference. But otherwise, I feel like it's probably going to be pretty similar, where they slow play things up front. So when you have a guy team that will fast play things up front, maybe then you want the big linebackers because they're more likely to take on blocks more often. But when you're asking your guys to play gap and a half, to slow down double teams, to just eat 2 guys so somebody else can make a play, that's keeping your linebacker clean, and he doesn't have to take on those blocks much. Still will have to at times. It's not like you can ever be so good that your linebackers never take on a block, but it's not as big of a priority as I think flying around the field, being athletic, covering, and then for them, I think blitzing, if they're going to keep that same blitz rate.
Is that the biggest difference? Is the way he's potentially going to bring pressure and how he does it, maybe the variety of it, all of those things? Obviously, they couldn't pressure the quarterback this year. And so whether it's asking the linebackers or any form of it, but is that it if you're looking from a scheme standpoint between Lou and Al?
We'll get to the back end. That's different too, but
different. This front end. Yeah,
on the front end, I think there's a couple differences where I think he likes to create confusion more often, where I don't recall Lou stemming his fronts very often. What stem is basically pre-snap motion for your defense, where, that creates communication, force people to talk on when the offense does it. It's taking all your defensive linemen and just shifting them over a gap, over to head up, over to, your nose was at the inside shoulder of the guard, and he just moved to head up over the center. That completely changes your blocking plan for what you're about to do with that nose, whereas probably going to be the guard's going to take that guy he's covered into, okay, now the center has to, and they've got to communicate this. You see that more at the college level. It's something I think that could make sense if they bring it to the NFL level, just because it's just stressing communication on the offensive line. Yeah, college guys, they're not professionals that go over this as their 9 to 5, but I think anytime you add that confusion to any part of football, it's going to help you out, create the chaos. They also slanted and stunted more often than Lou did, which would be your post-snap communication response, where your tackle is going to go out and the end loops around him. They have to be able to talk about that, pass that guy off, and make that move. And then, the blitzes matter too. And all different types of blitzes where he liked those peel blitzes I talked about, but he also liked green dogging. And that is, this linebacker is man-to-man on the running back. And if he stays in, that linebacker just rushes. He just runs right at that running back, tries to run him over on his way to the quarterback, because you also don't want to get in a situation where the running back kind of steps up and then goes out onto a route and you blitzed. This actually happened. That's how Drew Sample had that big touchdown against the Bills. The linebacker green dogged, and then he jumps over Taylor Rapp to score the touchdown and everything. But that's why he was so uncovered. The linebacker rushed, and Drew Sample's like, oh, there's nobody on me. So that's the problem with this. But that's something that I didn't see Lou do that much either, was green dog his linebackers. I feel like when the running back stayed in and they were in some type of man coverage, that linebacker turned into another hole defender, just kind of like watch the quarterback, move with him, vision, keep eyes on that running back too if he ever does leak out. Where Al's a little bit more aggressive, like just send him, keep sending more people at this quarterback.
Mike Hilton, the perfect green dog.
When I think stemming, I think, just for anyone who can't visualize it, the Madden adjustment where you're shifting your defensive line left or right or pinching or spreading them out. Everyone's done that that's ever played Madden. Can almost guarantee that. So if you're wondering, need that visual of what stemming is, hopefully that helps. Mike also has a bunch of great examples in his article over at BengalsTalk.com. Mike, last point here. Would you say obviously there's a ton more man. We're going to talk about that in our next episode when we get to the back end. But is that like the biggest? To me, that feels like one of the biggest differences in the style of pressure you're going to see, where a man blitz is so different from the various kinds of zone blitzes or types of fire zones that we would see from Lou Anarumo. And that's more of a back end thing, I guess. But maybe it just comes down to that preference. Is that it, or is it the style of blitz different? I mean, obviously there's only so many things you can do, but the frequency in which you go to them is a difference. Like, is there more cross dog stuff? For example, are you expecting your linebackers to be, as you mentioned, better pass rushers? Is that something we should expect from Al Golden compared to Lou Anarumo?
Yep. Yeah, that's I think everybody can blitz, but I think those linebackers in the Al Golden defense, he was sending boundary corners, safeties, nickels, everybody from the sideline. Your linebackers have to be able to pressure. They have to be able to pass rush a little bit. You're going to run blitz them too, but I think the main thing I think of is that guy probably can't just straight ahead rush, and if he's wide open, he gets something. You want to be able to beat running backs and tight ends in pass protection. But I think I don't think most linebackers beat offensive linemen, but running backs and tight ends, they're not the best at pass protection, especially running backs. So you have to be able to beat them. I think that would be the biggest difference, is having an ability to pass rush at least a little bit from the linebacker spot.
It sure is gratifying though when you do see a linebacker flatten an offensive lineman from time to time. That's going to do it for the front end of the Al Golden defense. Some of the personnel changes you can expect, some of the scheme changes you can expect. Let's talk more about the back end of this defense. We'll do that in the next episode, most likely, barring breaking news, here on Locked On Bengals with Mike Santagata. You can find the full breakdown at BengalsTalk.com. Until then, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.